The fact is, we live in the afterlife of slavery. We do not live in a post-racial society, and anti-blackness is alive and well. Right? Because if blackness is calculated, then it completely unravels the fabrication as to what we structure is necessary to be defined as women. Hey y'all, my name is Abbie, and thank you so much for tuning into this first episode of Talk To, Not At, hosted by me and produced by the Debate Boutique Network. Now, I'm an alumnus of high school and college policy debate, and now I coach both activities, yet I also have a passion for science, which is why I'm so excited to host a show that focuses on topics that are at the intersection of these two fields and right in my personal area of expertise. Now, the purpose of this show is to talk about whatever current culture is adding some atmospheric pressure into our everyday lives, and each episode will revolve around a specific topic and then focus on creating a safe, healthy environment for us to engage in some critical conversation, but also talk about some strategizing for protecting our own mental and physical health during our conversation. So I'm sure I am not the only person who after the past several months has had their social media feed completely bombarded with conversation about the Olympics. From different scandals to tabloid headlines, I am low-key, high-key getting sick and tired of it. And why, you might ask? Well, that's because a lot of the negative talk has revolved around black women, yet the conversation has missed the elephant in the room, which is who the heck decided that this year's Olympics was going to have this alternative motive of targeting and attacking black women on an international scale? I mean, I was getting so upset with consistently seeing headline after headline about something that revolved around black women in a negative way that I really needed to unplug from social media and plug into some research because I was not understanding what the heck was going on. I mean, for example, I was like, what the heck happened with Sha'Carri Richardson? Now, I knew the general thesis of what happened, that Sha'Carri had failed a drug test after her Olympic qualifying race, so she wasn't able to compete in the 100-meter dash because she had a 30-day suspension. Yet, in those same articles that I had read, I was under the impression that we were supposed to look out for Sha'Carri in the 4x100-meter relay because nothing about her suspension prevented her from running that relay race. Yeah, as I'm sitting here watching the Olympics, waiting for sis to pop up, she never was a part of that relay race team. So I was like, when did I miss the memo that Sha'Carri couldn't run on the relay team? So I decided to start my investigation. And y'all, the tea I uncovered is so much hotter than what I thought it was gonna be. So as it turns out, there's actually a lot more individual selection that goes into determining who is a part of an Olympic relay team than I thought there could be in the process. And after this conversation, you all cannot tell me that anti-blackness does not plague these individual choices that are made. So how it works is that the two fastest times automatically qualify to be part of that relay team. Since Sha'Carri was disqualifying during the Olympic qualifying race, it meant that she would have to be something called a discretionary pick. Now, a discretionary pick is when the specific committee comes together and decides who they want to fill in those two remaining spots. Either they can go with the third and fourth fastest time, or they can make a selection of someone who has shown in previous races and competitions that they have a better chance of allowing the United States to take home the gold medal. So everyone assumed that this pick was going to be Sha'Carri this year. And there were three main reasons as to why. One, as I already mentioned, there was nothing about Sha'Carri's 30-day suspension that prevented her from running on the relay team since her suspension ended before that relay race. Two, Sha'Carri went above and beyond to put herself back in good standing with the Olympic Committee. She even did drug counseling after she had failed her drug test to take ownership for her actions. And then three, the obvious reason, Sha'Carri is the fastest woman in the United States, so if you're trying to allow the U.S. the best chance of winning gold, then you're going to put Sha'Carri on that team. Yet clearly, she was not a discretionary pick. So I entered this bargaining stage of being like, okay, you know what? This is pretty messed up. To me, this is clearly anti-black. It really sucks that Sha'Carri ain't on the team. But you know what? At the end of the day, maybe these discretionary picks are once in a blue moon thing. So it's bad, but maybe it's not that bad. Yeah, no, y'all, it turns out it really is that bad. Because actually this year, we did make a discretionary pick for a similar situation. However, it was for the women's triathlon team. So what happened was there was an athlete, Miss Katie. She is a phenomenal women's triathlon athlete. In fact, in 2019, she won the Women's World Championship for the triathlon race. And she also competed on the Olympic team in 2016. Now, Katie has phenomenal stats, yet at the same time, we also have this woman named Taylor. Taylor is coming up, making some debut races, really showing that she can break her own PR time over and over again, and is showing herself to be a very strong candidate to be on that women's triathlon relay team. Now, unfortunately, this past spring, Katie's father had passed away, and it really impacted her performance, such as losing any parent would impact someone's performance. And she ended up going from placing in high-ranking positions to now falling behind to placing in positions such as 22nd. Yet at the same time, during these same races and competitions, Taylor's also competing, and she's placing in the top 5, she's placing 6th place, she's placing 4th place over and over, really showing that she's a strong candidate to be on that triathlon team. However, when it came down to the choice that was made, the Olympic Committee decided to replace Taylor on the team with Katie, even though in the Olympic qualifying race, Taylor took 4th and Katie took 16th. Now, I don't want to throw any shade at any athlete, and it's not to say that any of these athletes is undeserving, but rather, to me, it was a question of why, if Katie sat here and underperformed 3 times in a row, and when she went to the Olympics in 2016, she had an opportunity, and even then she underperformed. Why was Katie given the benefit of the doubt, given another opportunity, another chance to compete, yet Sha'Carri sat here, made a mistake, she didn't have her performance impacted, she lost her parents moments, days, right before she was supposed to run this race. She made a choice, took ownership for it, yet she's overly punished. There was nothing in the rules that said that she couldn't run in that relay race. Yet for some reason, she was chosen to be the one who was made an example of and could not participate in the Olympics at all. Not to mention, running track and field, you have a very small time frame to compete in the Olympics. So when it comes to a 100-meter dash, your time frame, your peak period or age is way smaller than when it comes to the triathlon race, where you have the opportunity to compete in the Olympics a multitude of times. Yet Sha'Carri had that chance completely taken away from her. So I'm like, okay, this narrative of black women being overly criminalized is old and tiresome, yet unfortunately, it's a thing that I recognize exists. So we kind of convince ourselves, right, that bargaining stage again, that if you play by the rules, if you're twice as good, then you should be Gucci-Tucci and nothing negative should happen to you. However, the Olympics put a check on that and says, psych, that's actually not how it works, because that's what happened to the company Soul Caps. Now, Soul Caps is a black-owned British business that partnered with a black Olympic alumnus to create a type of swim cap that provided more room for natural hair and natural protective hairstyles. So the point of this company was they were talking about how because of the way that swim caps are traditionally made, it doesn't leave room for black women to take care of their hair or grow their hair out. So they literally have to sacrifice their beautiful black hair to access competitive swim. Not to mention generational inaccessibility due to the fact that black people were unable to go to public or private swimming pools because of segregation, and also wealth barriers that make it very hard for certain communities to access competitive swim because, that sport be costing money. So what Soul Caps decided to do was make a niche in a global market to create a type of swim attire that was made for and made by black women to allow them to have some type of global representation to encourage more black women to not only access swim, but then also have the resources when they chose to access competitive swim. Now, this sounds like an amazing idea. No rules were broken. However, the Olympic Committee said, no, that's not going to fly with us because we don't really understand why you all kind of need these types of caps. And they justified banning, yes, y'all, they banned soul caps from the Olympics. They justified their ban by stating that these soul caps weren't something that was needed in previous Olympics. But Maybe in the future we'll come back and review this. Now, I'm sitting here reading their statement like, yeah, that's exactly the issue this company was talking about, was because previously swim, and still is, was dominated as a white sport. So, of course, it wasn't needed because there was very minimal black representation in competitive swim. They're trying to make it so swimming is more accessible for black people, even out the playing field a little bit. But you all saying, oh no, this isn't necessary, just shows what you're saying is having black representation, having blackness in this activity is not necessary. Because in fact, y'all, when we look at the stats for competitive swimming, when it comes to the number of female competitive swimmers, it's only 8% of those swimmers who are black women. When I say 0.8%, y'all, I mean out of every 1,000 women competitive swimmers, only 8 of them are black women. That is ridiculous. So of course we need some new representation on the global market to encourage young black girls to go out and engage in competitive swim. But no, the Swim Olympic Committee did not want to allow this company to do that. So then we get back into that trying to justify these actions stage, right? So black women, we get it. We're over-criminalized. We're persecuted if we speak out about our blackness. So play by the rules, don't make mistakes, follow respectability politics, and maybe you can squeak on by. But then there was a harsh reality check again, that the Olympics showed us that even if you access the playing field by doing everything they tell you to do, then they'll just ban you yourself from being able to engage in the competition. And this is what happened to 2 Namibian black women when they were trying out for the women's track and field competition. Now, these 2 black women were banned from competing in the Olympics because their natural occurring testosterone levels were too high, which gave them an unfair advantage against the other athletes. Now, when we think about the conversation of testosterone, this is often very frustrating for me because I've noticed this conversation really only revolves around black women. So now gender norms are weaponized against black women to make it so that way they can't even be in the same category as what white women are. So what you're telling me is that because some black women are naturally built, because testosterone is a hormone that allows you to build muscle, since they're naturally built, they can't compete, which, mind you, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought the intention of sports was to make it so that way whoever has the best physical endowment would win that competition. Yet if we're having a conversation of testosterone, then why is it always black women who are exiled from the category because their hormone levels aren't normal concentration levels? So these 2 black women were told either you need to take hormone supplements or you can't compete. And shout out to these queens because they said, yeah, no, I'm good. They chose not to take the hormone supplements. But still, that doesn't mean the conversation is over and done with. The issue is that the very foundations of the way that we understand gender exclude black women from the category. So what the Olympics really embodied this year is that if you are a black woman, if you work hard as hell, if you are twice as good, if you are humble, if you play by the rules, as long as you don't open your mouth, it doesn't matter what you do. There will still be a way that the world will operate or work to criminalize, to harm, to exile you from being able to equally access the same playing field as white competitors. Now, that's a very loaded statement that I just gave. And for some of you all, you might be here talking about, okay, that totally makes sense. I'm with you on it. I'm excited to see where you're about to go. And there's some of you all who might be like, okay, well, Abbie, back it up right now. Cool it down a notch. I really don't know where you're going with this because I don't really want to accept the reality that there ain't nothing that I can do, that I don't have a choice as to what consequences or what lived experiences I get to have, right? Because that's kind of what I'm saying, is that anti-blackness is so totalitizing, we really ain't got a choice of when we're going to be criminalized, of when we're going to face violence, that even if you play by all the rules, even if you try to water down your blackness, it doesn't matter because you yourself will continue to be attacked. And you cannot avoid these consequences. Truth of the matter is, slavery shapes all the lived experiences of black women. Heck, y'all, not just black women, of everybody in the world. Slavery shapes all the lived experiences and reality of everybody in the world today. The fact is, we live in the afterlife of slavery. We do not live in a post-racial society, and anti-blackness is alive and well. Now, I kind of came at y'all a little intense for a moment. I put out some facts there, and I know that we all kind of I personally need a moment to just digest all of that, because when I start to get into a conversation, I notice at times I get really worked up, my stress levels begin to rise, my anger begins to rise, and I need to sit back, decompress, relax, and make sure that I take a moment to really breathe.
I'ma tell you this one time, where I want you to be mine. Can I come see you now? Can I lay with you outside? Can I touch your lips with mine? 'Cause I need you now. Don't wanna leave, I just wanna be here by your side. You make me feel and believe that we invent die. 'Cause I don't feel the ground. No, I don't feel the ground. But I'm feeling right. I tell you what it's all about. It's making me feel this way. It's kinda like whoa, life, life. Oh, you make me feel and believe it beyond life, life.
Okay, y'all, I hope we all use that moment to take some deep breaths, to really relax ourselves. For me, it involved drinking some hot tea. Do whatever it is that helps you release some of that energy that was built up during our start of the conversation, because especially when we're talking about some harsh topics, we want to make sure that we're taking breathing moments to preserve our own mental health, and also to prepare us to be able to fully upload ourselves into the next portion of this conversation. Now, we also had a quote flash up on the screen, and I want to make sure that we put a pin in that thought and use it and have it in the back of our heads as we continue this conversation, because it's really going to help add some coherency as to why I made some of the bold statements that I had just made. Now, we worked together to uncover this common trend that was happening during the Olympics, right? It was that Black women were attacked and prevented from being able to be present in this global competition. And then I made this wild statement that everything that happened during slavery shapes everything that happens right now. And often when it comes to the conversation of race, we like to do this bargaining, right? Where we like to say, okay, maybe there was racial bias or racism present in this decision, but it's not as totalitizing of a structure as I basically claim that it is. However, that's me being the bearer of bad news and giving you all a harsh reality check. That we do not live in a post-racial society, and that the legacy of slavery shapes everyone's lived reality today. Now, when I try to break down that concept, I really refer to some of my favorite authors to help me process this, specifically my favorite author, Saidiya Hartman. She does an amazing job of talking about how plantation politics shapes civil society and modernity today. And one of those key concepts that allows for us to really understand what happened during the Olympics and why it was necessary to have those things happen to maintain the way that the world operates is this idea of the framework of opposites. Now, when I say framework of opposites, I literally just mean the way that we understand grammar, the way that in society we understand what is based on what is not. So we understand night versus day, good versus bad, rich versus poor. Now, what gives meaning to those concepts, such as rich versus poor, is that rich is associated with certain benefits, while poor is associated with certain positions of suffering. So we add a value to the idea of being rich and a value to the idea of being poor. Now, that same logic was used on the plantation to give meaning to the master as being white, but then also the slave as being black. And during this time, mind us all, right, that not only is slavery being formulated, but so are the legal systems of a new American society, and so is capitalism as an international, socioeconomic network. So as on the plantation, the position of the master is being formed, there also needs to be the formation of that positionality in coherency with other structures that are being formed at the same time. This is why the position of the master had to be identified as being white, as being human, as being the moral subject, as being able to assert dominance or own property. And the position of the slave was in the exact opposition to that. The slave was then black. The slave was not human. The slave was not moral, but rather criminal. The slave was not able to assert property because they couldn't even have ownership over themselves. Now, that necessary delineation between the master as being white, moral, and human was necessary to make it so that way there was coherency with the rest of the structures in society. If that power or some of that power was able to have fluidity between the positionality of white and black, then that means at times the black subject was also able to assert subjectivity, or the black subject was able to hold humanity, which meant that those same legal structures that preserved human rights, the rights of life, liberty, and the right to own property, or the right to pursue happiness, those same unalienable rights would then be applicable to the black slave, which meant when the master inflicted violence onto the position of the slave, then the master was doing an unmoral and inhumane act and could be persecuted by the law. So it was necessary to completely eradicate black positionality from the bounds of humanity so that confrontation would never happen. They had to be permanent positions to make white privilege some tangible concept that white people were always able to access to protect themselves from the law and to make the law work for them, to make morality work for them. So that same concept is something that Hartman then uses to really give an understanding as to how the concept of gender operated. Now, mind you, we understand that gender is a social construct, and gender was something that was formulated again in this network of oppositions, but it was based on the position of the human. So the black subject location was not in the equation when we really cemented what gender was meant to represent in the new American society and then on an international scale. Now, gender was formulated where the white man, right, had the position of the dominant subject, had the position of being able to be a more aggressive. The white master, again, had masculinity on their side, right? They were supposed to be the hard laborer, to go out into the public sphere to perform laborious actions, while the positionality of the feminine or the woman was supposed to be docile, was supposed to be sweet, was supposed to be dainty, was supposed to be like small and petite, right? The woman was supposed to be in this position of innocence. Yet these identities or positionalities were only able to be enacted out by white society, who was given the ability to have agency. We recognize that gender is an idea of characteristics that gets prescribed onto a specific anatomy that says, if you are this anatomy, if you were born in this position, you have the obligation to perform these types of societal roles. However, black women were never able to access that positionality. They were never able to perform gender. When it came to black women, right, you weren't able to perform motherhood because you were constantly having children ripped from your arms. Yet that was something that society said was necessary to perform the gender of being a woman, something that only white women could do. You were never in the position of innocence because your blackness determined that you were always a criminal. So even when you were assaulted by your master, the master's wife could then come and punish you for seducing her husband because you were always already the criminal. Yet for the white woman, when she has relations with a black man, she is now being assaulted or raped by him, and she is never the one who is found to be criminal because whiteness has a permanent stance of always being innocent, and that was necessary to preserving white womanhood. So these oppositional frameworks that were used not only to create the legal system, the framework of criminality, were also used to then create our understanding of how gender is supposed to be performed and how gender operates, which means that black women, again, were never able to even be in the category of being a female, in the category of being a woman. They were always discarded to the side, not able to access that type of performance. So that very same concept is in how we can understand what happened to Sha'Carri Richardson, because it wasn't just the fact that Sha'Carri performed an action that was a mistake, but rather Sha'Carri's criminality is personified onto her body. Sha'Carri's mistake becomes the identification of her blackness. So when Sha'Carri is punished, it's not the crime that is being punished, but rather Sha'Carri herself that must be eradicated from the equation to then solve for the crime or have adequate punishment of what happened. It's she herself who is being targeted. Yet when we look at that conversation with what happened to Katie, there is the ability to divorce the action from the positionality when it comes to white women, because the action may be a crime, but crime doesn't fit into the world of whiteness, because whiteness is always innocent, whiteness is always correct, whiteness is always pure. So when Katie made mistakes of underperformance, her actions did not match her true character. So there was a level of dissonance between Katie and her action that allowed for sympathy to fill in that gap, which made it so the Olympic Committee was able to err on the side of the benefit of the doubt and give her another opportunity, because her actions, again, do not speak to her true character, but that whiteness overpowers the decisions or performances that happened. Yet again, for Sha'Carri, there is no gap for that sympathy. So she is always already going to be punished. She already was criminalized. So even though these social locations, right, for a white woman, you can have acts of doing criminal things, you can have acts of doing mistake, there is room for that legal system to sympathize with the humanity of whiteness and to give you a lesser punishment. It's not to say that white people ain't ever been punished before for doing a crime, but rather an understanding of how their humanity still changes the ways that punishment operates in terms of the legal system. Yet for black people, that's why black people are punished at a much higher rate for doing less significant crimes, because there is no space for sympathy, because there is no humanity that is recognized within the legal system on blackness, into blackness. So that means, again, Sha'Carri is consistently going to be punished. And when she made the mistake of failing her drug test, that was her just resorting back to her born natural behavior. There's no ability for her to divorce her own identity from a mistake that happened. It will always be tied to her blackness. So her blackness must then be eradicated from the Olympics. Just got one thing to say. Next week, y'all, R. Kelly.